developers, we've talked briefly just now about variables and what those are, and functions and what those are. I haven't gone too much into details of what those are, but now I wanted to kind of put a little umbrella conversation about how variables and functions will come together so that we can have executable code, and how executable code actually runs. And so in here, I actually open up a file where we have some code, and you're not going to understand really much of what's going on here too much to get started off with, right? So I got a bunch of things to find here. We talked already about what a variable is, and here's the keyword variable. Here's the name, and here's the value of a string. Here's another object. Here's some variables that are, even though they're declared, there's no initialization of value. We are familiar with a function and how there's a name and there's an open close parens. This is us trying to use the function. And then here below here in this code is the code that defines what the instructions of that function are. And so look at that inside there, there's some more code. So you have this code, and now all this code is actually inside the script block. Okay. So inside of that script block in this code is what I want to talk to you a little bit about at a general level, how this code kind of gets recognized by the environment. In this case of how we're learning the code now, it's going to be in the environment of a browser, the JavaScript engine. But the JavaScript engine actually also exists when you do backend development if you're doing node development. So here I've come to this area where I can draw. So the first thing that kind of happens for the environment is that it's going to recognize, hey, here's this chunk of code. It's JavaScript. Let's recognize that it's just here. And it really just does that. It's just, okay, sucks it in. All of this is JavaScript. And the first thing that it tries to do is like, is it valid JavaScript? Is the syntax correct? Is there any, are there any syntax errors that are meaningful enough that'll, keep the engine from starting? If there are no problems, it's going to get started and then it's going to start running. There are problems, and so this is a meaningful, and when I say meaningful, it could be something as silly like as a misplaced comma. It could be just a misplaced comma, and it'll basically throw the wrench in the works and nothing happens. Nothing happens. The error is so, again, meaningful that you can't run your code. So let's say that you get past that. You do actually have syntactically valid code. The JavaScript engine here says, boom, okay, we got this chunk of code. What are we going to do? It goes through a number of steps to try to recognize, who are the players in this code? Like, who are the variables? Who are the declared variables? Who are the functions? It tries to actually, there's different types of functions. So some functions it recognizes right away, and some other functions it doesn't recognize right away. But once it does this, it's kind of like recognition of like, hey, what's going on here in this playing field? Then it starts to run. And for most of this foundations course, the code is going to run top down. It's going to run top down. And the browser is going to literally run line 24 and then run line 25, 30, 31, 32, etc. Top down. Most of the time. Okay? Most of the time. Because what happens is that's how it is. You're reading in instructions. And so most of the time it's like instructions A, do A, then do B, then do C. But every now and then it gets to a point where, hey, for example, here I'm executing this first level function. The first level function needs to run. But the first level function, where is it? It's not necessarily going to be below it. It's not going to necessarily be above it. The first level function points to a location in memory, a location and address of these instructions, and the JavaScript engine will just pop over there and run it. But when it pops over there, right, when it pops over there to a specific, let me redraw this. Hey, here's the address of this function where I find all my instructions of this function. When I find myself to this specific location, here's the start of this function. What happens when I get there is I do run top down. Most of the time. So I want you to start recognizing that this code is going to run top down. All right. It's going to run top down, but leave room for the fact that sometimes it's not going to be top down. All right. And that you'll get probably in the next course. And to like illustrate for you, what I mean by that is if I asked you to think about your first name and I asked you to think now about your address. you recognize what your first name is and you recognize what your address is. Which one is on top of the other one? Which one comes first? If I asked you to organize your thoughts now, and I said, okay, where's the address in relationship to your first name? You know, is it on top of each other? Is it side by side? Is one in front of the others? Right? You don't necessarily think about those two data points as being relative to each other in some type of space, that one has to be on top of each other, that one has to be side by side. If you needed to connect them, you would, and that's what the code does. So it's a similar phenomena that happens in the code. Sometimes we're just, reading our address, we're reading a book, we're reading some stuff, and it is top down. And sometimes you're just pulling things out of memory and connecting them as you're moving forward in your task. All right. So as you see us coding in the first few files, and you see us writing one line, then followed by the other, and then we're going to write a third line, we're going to write a fourth line. The JavaScript engine is in fact going to recognize and execute that code in that order that we've written it. All right, so good luck with your coding. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, I look forward to seeing you for office hours, where I'm going to be very happy to answer the questions that you generate.